Story number 1. The Mystery of the Yeti. You know how some stories are whispered, passed along in hushed tones between strangers at campfires or in the dark corners of taverns. They grow with each telling, each retelling twisting them into something both wondrous and terrifying. That's how the story of the Yeti starts. But let me tell you, it's a lot more real than you might think. It all began back in 2015. I wasn't a professional adventurer or a thrill seeker. I didn't have a death wish or some misguided craving for danger. No, I was just an ordinary guy who decided to take a break from the grind of city life and do something wild. Something that would make a decent story for the grandkids. You know, I found myself in the Himalayas, the mountains towering above me like sentinels of stone, casting long shadows over the world below. I joined a small expedition to climb a relatively unknown peak just outside of the usual tourist paths. The guides, most of them born and raised in the region, talked more about the beauty of the place than the danger. But even they couldn't help but occasionally glance over their shoulders, as if something were following us. It was supposed to be a relatively easy trek, nothing like Everest, nothing like those terrifying climbs you see in documentaries. Just a few days of moderate climbing and hiking. But even from the start, something felt off. There were 4 of us on the trip. Myself, a couple named James and Caroline, and a guide named Tenzin. Tenzin was the kind of guide who knew every crag and every ridge of the mountain. He was practically born there, as most of the local guides are. At least, that's what I thought. Tenzin's face was always serious, his eyes narrow with what I now recognize as suspicion. But we were all too caught up in the thrill of the climb to think much about it. The first signs that something was wrong appeared on the 3rd night of our climb. We had just set up camp near a rocky outcrop. High above the tree line, the wind howled through the jagged peaks, and the air was thin, making every breath feel like a struggle. We were exhausted, having pushed ourselves all day to reach that point. But as the campfire flickered in the freezing night, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Footprints. Huge ones. Far too large to belong to a human. They weren't just deep, as if made by a heavy person trudging through the snow. No, these were massive, almost unnatural in their proportions. Tenzin seemed to notice them at the same time I did, and without a word, he motioned for the others to stay back. He moved cautiously toward the edge of the camp, peering into the night with those narrow eyes of his, the firelight dancing off his face. "Yeti," he whispered, almost to himself. I laughed, thinking it was some kind of joke. "Come on, Tenzin. Yeti? Really?" He didn't laugh. His face remained impassive, and for a moment, the wind seemed to die down, as if the mountain itself were holding its breath. Tenzin looked at us and then gestured toward the trail of footprints. "I know what I saw," he said quietly. "It's real. I thought it was just the exhaustion, the cold getting to his head. The Yeti? That was a story for children. Some kind of myth meant to scare tourists. Nothing more." But I didn't argue. You don't argue with a man like Tenzin in the mountains. We moved the camp further up the ridge the next day, away from the strange tracks. But the uneasy feeling stayed with me. Couldn't shake it. I kept looking over my shoulder. And even though I didn't want to believe in what Tenzin had said, the possibility lingered, like a shadow that never quite left. We continued our climb, but the deeper we went into the mountains, the more things started to unravel. By the 5th night, we were camping near a frozen lake, the wind whistling like some kind of ghostly wail in the distance. As I lay in my tent, the cold seeping into my bones, I thought I heard something, a noise, faint at first, but growing louder, the crunch of snow, a heavy, uneven rhythm. I froze, heart pounding in my chest. It sounded like footsteps, the kind you hear when someone is walking in snow, the way their boots sink in with each step. I wasn't sure if I was dreaming. My mind was clouded by fatigue and the thin air. But then I heard it again, closer this time. "James?" I whispered, trying to rouse my friend from his deep slumber. But no answer came. I unzipped the tent slowly, trying not to wake the others. and crept outside into the freezing night. The moon hung low over the snow, casting a pale glow over the camp. I couldn't see much, just the outlines of the tents, the dark trees swaying gently in the wind. But then, as I scanned the perimeter of the camp, I saw them. More tracks. I followed them, compelled by something I couldn't explain, a mixture of fear and curiosity gnawing at me. The tracks were clearer now, huge, monstrous tracks that led away from the camp and into the dark expanse of the forest. I don't know what I expected to find. Maybe nothing. Maybe it was just an animal, some bear or something large enough to leave those marks in the snow. But as I moved further, deeper into the woods, the hairs on the back of my neck began to rise. That's when I saw it. A figure, tall, hulking, and covered in fur. It was standing between the trees, just barely visible in the dim light. It was watching me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I know I should have turned and run, but I couldn't. All I could do was stare, frozen in place. As the thing stared back, its eyes were yellow, glowing like fire, and its breath steamed in the cold air, almost like it was waiting for me to make a move. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and disappeared into the forest, vanishing like smoke in the wind. I stumbled back to camp, my legs shaking, my mind racing. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't tell anyone what I had seen, not without sounding insane. But the next morning, I noticed something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. James and Caroline were gone. Their tents were empty, their belongings untouched. The tracks around their tents were normal, no signs of struggle, no sign of anything out of place. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. I don't know how to explain it, but I do know this: the Yeti, or whatever it was, had been following us. And it wasn't just some myth. We were lucky. We made it out of the mountains alive. But the memory of that night, the cold stare of that creature, still lingers with me. I can't shake it. I keep seeing those eyes in my dreams. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear the footsteps in the snow, the slow, steady crunching of something big and heavy moving through the forest, just outside the reach of the firelight. If you ever decide to venture into the Himalayas, be careful where you tread. Some stories are best left untold, because the Yeti is not a myth. It's waiting, watching, and when you least expect it, it will find you. Story number 2. The Lost Skiers of Mount Hood. I can still feel the cold in my bones. Even now, when I think about that day on Mount Hood, the chill of it rushes back. It's the kind of cold that isn't just a drop in temperature, but something deeper, something that gets into your skin, your blood, cold that stays with you, that doesn't leave. Maybe that's why I can't forget what happened. It all started on that Wednesday morning. In the middle of December 2006, the sky was clear, the sun was barely beginning to rise, and the mountain looked like something out of a postcard. 3 of us, me, Matt, and Jason, had come up to Mount Hood for a quick day of skiing. We were experienced, or at least, that's what we told ourselves. We'd skied here a dozen times before, knew the mountain well enough, but we weren't prepared for what it had in store for us that day. I remember the air, sharp and crisp, and the sound of our skis carving through the snow as we made our way up to the top. Jason was ahead, always eager to push the limits. Matt was a bit more cautious, but he always followed, like the loyal friend he was. As for me, well, I was somewhere in between. I liked the thrill, but I also knew enough to be careful. I should have been more careful that day. We'd been skiing for a few hours when things started to take a strange turn. It was nothing big at first. A slip, a fall, a gust of wind that felt too cold, too sharp. But then, as we were skiing down one of the more isolated trails, I noticed something that didn't quite sit right. There was a feeling. You know how, sometimes, you get the feeling that someone's watching you? That prickling on the back of your neck. That sense of eyes on you even though you're alone? That's how it started. First, I thought it was just the isolation of the mountain getting to me. The kind of paranoia that happens when you're out in the middle of nowhere. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew. And it wasn't just me. Matt had started to look over his shoulder, too, like he could feel it. Jason. Though Jason was too lost in the rush of skiing to notice. It wasn't until we reached the base of the trail that it became clear we weren't alone. First, it was just little things. A shadow at the edge of our vision, moving quickly, too quickly to be the wind or snow. A faint sound, like footsteps, crunching behind us in the snow. We'd all heard it, but when we turned around, nothing. Just the mountain, just the trees, the white expanse, the frozen stillness. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. Matt had taken the lead, as he always did when things felt off. He didn't say much, but I could tell he was feeling it, too. Jason was still going full throttle, as if he hadn't noticed a damn thing, charging ahead like the mountain was his personal playground. I saw the figure before Matt did. At first, it was just a flicker out of the corner of my eye, but then I saw it again, clearer this time. The figure, standing just off to the side of the trail, partially obscured by the trees. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there, watching us. I called out to Matt. But when he turned, the figure was gone. Just some skier up ahead, he said, shaking his head. Come on, let's catch up to Jason. But the feeling hadn't gone. It was like the air itself had thickened, the weight of something unseen pressing down on us. We kept going, but the mountain had turned strange. The snow beneath our skis felt wrong, too soft, too deep. The wind had picked up, biting at our faces like it had a mind of its own. And still, that feeling, the feeling that we were being watched, that someone or something was following us. By the time we reached the next ridge, we had lost sight of Jason. He'd taken a different route, as he often did when he was off chasing the thrill of the mountain. But he'd been gone longer than usual, longer than we'd expected. We called out for him, but there was no answer. That's when I felt it. Jason's absence was wrong. I don't know how to explain it. It wasn't just the silence, the way the mountain had fallen still. It was something deeper, something colder. It didn't make sense, but I felt it. Something had happened to him. We set off in search of him. The wind howled now, fierce and biting, and the snow had started to fall heavier, blanketing everything. We called for him again and again, but all we heard was the sound of the wind, the howl of the storm building around us. And then, through the falling snow, we saw the tracks. Jason's tracks. They were clear enough, left in the fresh snow, but they stopped. The tracks didn't just stop in a typical way, like someone had gone off the trail. No, these tracks, they vanished, as if Jason had disappeared right in front of us. There were no other tracks around them, no signs of him going anywhere else. It was as if he had been lifted from the snow, pulled out of existence. We searched for hours, our voices hoarse, our bodies numb from the cold. But there was no sign of Jason, no sign of his skis, no sign of anything. That night, when we finally made it back to the lodge, the authorities were already there. They'd found Matt, collapsed, his face pale with exhaustion and terror. He couldn't speak at first, just shook his head, his eyes wide with a look I couldn't understand. And then he muttered something that I will never forget. I saw it. I saw him. He wasn't alone. Something was with him. They never found Jason's body. Search teams scoured the mountain for days, weeks even, but they couldn't find him. Not a trace, no clothing, no gear, nothing, just the snow, the ever-growing storm, and the silence that followed. But here's the thing I'll never understand. The following spring, when the snow had finally melted and the mountain had returned to its usual quiet state, the search teams found something, a set of tracks, fresh tracks, even though no one had been on the mountain for months. And those tracks led up to a place that no one could explain. A cabin, hidden deep in the trees, covered by the forest for years. It wasn't on any maps, and it hadn't been there before. But there it was, untouched by time, No sign of anyone living there, just a broken-down door, shattered windows, and the faint scent of something rotten. Inside, they found something else. Jason's skis, his pack, his jacket, his gloves, but no sign of Jason. And the strangest thing? There were two sets of footprints leading away from the cabin. One was Jason's. The other, well, it wasn't. They didn't recognize the second set. But I think I do. The thing that followed us. The thing that watched us. The thing that was with Jason. Is still out there. Still watching. Still waiting. And that feeling, I feel it now. Even as I tell you this. The feeling that I'm not alone. If you ever find yourself on Mount Hood, be careful. Watch your back. Because sometimes, the mountain doesn't just take people. Sometimes, it holds on to them. Forever. Story number 3. The fatal ski lift accident. The first snowfall of the season had transformed Whistler Blackham into a winter paradise, each flake adding to the pristine blanket that covered the expansive slopes. I still remember that day in January 2011 as if it were yesterday, the biting cold in the air, the sun reflecting off the snow like a million tiny mirrors, and the laughter of friends echoing through the crisp mountain air. My name is Michael Carter, and I was there with a group of close friends, eager to carve our way through the untouched powder and escape the mundane routines of daily life. Whistler Blackham had always been our go-to destination for skiing trips, a place where the stress of work and the chaos of the city melted away under the shadow of towering peaks. We arrived early in the morning, the lodge bustling with excited skiers and snowboarders preparing for the day's adventures. After a hearty breakfast, we strapped on our gear and made our way to the base of the mountain, the anticipation palpable among us. The lift that day was one of the newest additions to the resort, a high-speed gondola that promised quicker ascents and more time on the slopes. It was a marvel of modern engineering, sleek and efficient, gliding effortlessly up the mountain. As we boarded the gondola, the sun was high, casting long shadows on the snow and illuminating the vast expanse of the alpine landscape. "Can't wait to hit those runs," I said, adjusting my goggles and feeling the thrill of the upcoming descent. "Me neither," replied Sarah, her voice full of excitement. She was the most adventurous among us, always pushing the limits and seeking the next big thrill. The gondola ride was smooth, the views breathtaking as we ascended higher into the mountains. We chatted and laughed, the stress of our everyday lives forgotten in the embrace of nature's beauty. But as we reached the midpoint of the journey, an uneasy feeling began to settle over me, a subtle sense that something was off, though I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "Everything okay, Mike?" Tom asked, noticing my sudden silence. I forced a smile, dismissing the unease. "Yeah, just enjoying the view." But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the serene beauty of the mountains concealed something darker beneath the surface. The gondola continued its ascent, the sky gradually darkening as clouds began to gather on the horizon. "Looks like we might get some snow today," Mark observed, peering out the window. "Just a light dusting, hopefully," Sarah added, her optimism unwavering. As the gondola reached the upper station, the storm broke loose with a ferocity that none of us had anticipated. The sky turned a menacing shade of gray, the wind howling through the trees and whipping up the snow into blinding flurries. Visibility plummeted, and the once clear path down the mountain became a treacherous maze of whiteout conditions. "We need to head back," I urged, my voice tinged with urgency. "The weather's getting worse." But Tom, always the skeptic, waved me off. "It's just a bit of a storm. We'll be fine." Reluctantly, we disembarked from the gondola and began our descent, the snow crunching under our boots as we navigated the slippery trails. The storm's intensity increased with each passing minute, the wind biting at our faces and the snow stinging our eyes. It felt as though the mountain itself was conspiring against us, the once inviting slopes now turning hostile and unforgiving. As we struggled to maintain our footing, a loud, grinding noise erupted from the lift above. We looked up just in time to see the gondola swaying violently, the cables straining under the weight of the storm. Panic surged through me as the realization hit. Something was terribly wrong with the lift. "Everyone, stay calm," I shouted, trying to steady my voice despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "We need to get to safety." But before we could react, a massive jolt shook the gondola, sending it plummeting down the mountain. Screams filled the air as the gondola twisted and turned, the cables snapping under the immense pressure. Time seemed to slow as we hurtled towards the ground, the world around us a blur of white and darkness. The impact was bone-jarring, the force of the fall leaving us disoriented and battered. I groaned, struggling to open my eyes, the world spinning around me. Pain radiated through my body, each breath a struggle against the searing cold that enveloped me. Around me, I could hear the frantic cries of my friends, their voices muffled by the snow and the chaos of the storm. "Mike, are you okay?" Sarah's voice pierced through the haze, her concern evident even through the pain. I think so," I managed to reply, my voice barely above a whisper. "But we need to get out of here." We struggled to our feet, the cold numbing our limbs and making every movement a Herculean effort. The scene around us was one of utter devastation. Snow piled high, the remnants of the gondola twisted and broken, bodies scattered and lifeless beneath the white blanket. Some of our friends were missing, their fates unknown as the storm continued to rage unabated. Desperation fueled our actions as we searched for any signs of survivors, our hearts heavy with the fear that some of us had been lost to the mountain's wrath. But amidst the chaos, something inexplicably strange began to unfold. A sense of being watched, a presence lurking in the shadows that defied explanation. As night fell, the storm showed no signs of relenting, the snow continuing to fall in relentless sheets that obscured our vision and sapped our strength. We found shelter in a partially collapsed cabin, the walls covered in ice and the interior cold and damp. Huddled together for warmth, we tried to make sense of what had happened, the horrors of the day weighing heavily on our minds. But the feeling of unease persisted, growing stronger as the hours passed. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and faint whispers echoed through the cabin, their source unknown and unnerving. It was as if the mountain itself was alive, the spirits of those lost in the storm lingering in the frozen air, their presence a constant reminder of our fragile mortality. "Do you guys feel that?" Mark whispered, his eyes darting nervously around the room. I nodded, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. "Yeah, something's not right here." As midnight approached, the temperature dropped further, our breaths visible in the frigid air. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, the shadows swirling with an unnatural energy. It was then that we saw them, ghostly apparitions of skiers and snowboarders, their forms translucent and shimmering in the dim light. They moved silently around the cabin, their eyes hollow and filled with sorrow, their presence both haunting and tragic. "We need to leave," Tom urged, his voice trembling. "This place isn't safe." But the cabin doors were frozen shut, the snow and ice forming an impenetrable barrier against the outside world. Panic set in as we realized we were trapped, our only option to confront the restless spirits that now surrounded us. The apparitions began to communicate, their whispers forming words that chilled us to the core. "Why do you disturb our peace?" one of the spirits moaned, his voice echoing through the cabin like the howling wind outside. "You came seeking adventure, but the mountain claims what it desires." We're sorry," I stammered, my voice shaking with fear and guilt. "We didn't mean any harm. We were just trying to enjoy the slopes." The spirits seemed to waver, their forms flickering with uncertainty. "Your presence disrupts the balance," another spirit replied, her voice filled with sadness. "The mountain is not to be trifled with." Desperate to find a way out, we began to search the cabin for any means of escape, our movements frantic as the spirits watched us with mournful eyes. But no matter what we did, the doors remained locked, the shadows pressing in closer, their whispers growing louder and more desperate. In a final attempt to appease the spirits, we decided to perform a ritual of apology and respect, hoping to earn their forgiveness and release us from the cursed cabin. We gathered what little supplies we had, candles, a bottle of water, and a map of the resort, and began to chant softly, our voices blending into a single plea for mercy. The atmosphere shifted, the oppressive weight lifting slightly as the spirits listened to our heartfelt apology. The apparitions began to fade, their forms dissolving into the cold air as a sense of peace settled over the cabin. The doors to the cabin slowly unlocked, the ice melting away as if by magic, granting us passage back to the outside world. With a collective sigh of relief, we stepped out into the night, the storm finally beginning to subside. The snow continued to fall, but the intensity had lessened, the once relentless storm now a gentle whisper against the mountain's slopes. Exhausted and battered, we made our way back to the base of the lift, our hearts heavy with the memory of the day we had survived. In the days that followed, we were hailed as heroes, our survival a testament to our resilience and the unbreakable bond of friendship. But beneath the surface of our triumphant return lay a lingering sense of unease, a haunting reminder of the spirits we had encountered and the thin veil that separates the living from the dead. The fatal ski lift accident at Whistler Blackham became a legend, a story of survival and the mysterious forces that dwell within the mountains. But for me, it was a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the dark secrets that lie hidden in the shadows of nature's grandeur. The whispers of those lost souls still echo in my mind, a ghostly refrain that serves as a constant reminder of the mountain's unforgiving power and the enduring mysteries that remain unsolved. And every time I strap on my skis, I carry with me the memory of that fateful day, a day when adventure turned to nightmare, and the mountain claimed what it desired, leaving behind only the echoes of a tragic tale that still lingers in the cold, silent peaks of Aspen. Story number 4. The bizarre disappearance of Mark Zapp. The first snowfall of the season had transformed Aspen into a winter wonderland, each flake shimmering under the afternoon sun like a tiny, fragile diamond. I still remember that day in January 2006. The sky a perfect shade of azure, the mountains towering majestically against the horizon. Mark Zapp was with me, his laughter echoing through the crisp mountain air as we navigated the familiar slopes of Snowmass. Mark was more than just a friend. He was the heartbeat of our group, the one who could find humor in the bleakest of moments. Mark had always been drawn to the mountains, finding solace in their silent grandeur. He was an avid skier, always pushing the limits, seeking the thrill of untouched trails and the exhilaration of speed down powdery slopes. That day, we had planned a trip that promised adventure and the kind of memories that would last a lifetime. Little did we know, it would instead become a haunting chapter in our lives, a mystery that still lingers in the cold, silent peaks of Aspen. We had started early, the sun barely cresting the mountains, casting long shadows across the snow. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the faint hint of impending snowstorms that were common in these parts. Mark had mapped out a route that took us through some of the most challenging terrains, a testament to his unyielding spirit and love for the mountains. As we ascended higher, the landscape grew more rugged, the trails narrower, and the snow deeper. Around midday, we reached a secluded area known as Devil's Gulch, a narrow crevice carved between two towering cliffs. The route was less traveled, promising untouched slopes and the kind of pristine snow that skiers dream of. Mark was in his element, carving effortlessly through the snow, his laughter ringing out as he performed daring maneuvers that left us both in awe and a little envious. As the day progressed, the weather began to change. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon, obscuring the sun and casting an eerie pall over the landscape. Mark, ever the optimist, shrugged off the ominous signs, insisting that we could still enjoy the day. "It's just a bit of bad weather," he said, his voice steady despite the growing unease in the air. We'll make it back before the storm hits. But there was something different about Mark that day. A subtle shift in his demeanor. A flicker of anxiety in his eyes that I couldn't quite place. We continued our descent. The storm clouds inching closer. The wind picking up speed, carrying with it a biting chill that penetrated even our thickest jackets. The trails became more treacherous, the visibility reducing to mere feet ahead of us. As we reached the lower slopes, the first heavy snowflakes began to fall, each one landing with a muffled thud against our helmets. Mark suggested we take a break, seeking shelter in a small alcove carved into the mountainside. We unpacked our gear, huddling together for warmth as the storm intensified, the wind howling like a pack of restless spirits. Hours passed, the storm showing no signs of abating. Mark and I decided it was time to head back, our earlier optimism now replaced by a growing sense of urgency. We secured our equipment, ensuring we were prepared for the treacherous descent. As we began our journey back, the storm's fury unleashed its full force, the snow now falling in heavy, relentless sheets that obscured everything in sight. Visibility was near zero, the world around us reduced to a blur of white. Mark led the way, his expertise guiding us through the whiteout conditions, his presence a steadying force against the chaos. But as we navigated the slippery trails, a sense of dread settled over me, an unshakable feeling that we were being watched, that something malevolent lurked just beyond the veil of snow and wind. Suddenly, Mark veered off the main trail, heading towards a narrow, less traveled path that seemed to appear out of nowhere. "There's a shortcut here," he called out, his voice strained against the roar of the storm. "It'll save us time." I hesitated, the memory of our earlier optimism now overshadowed by fear. "Are you sure, Mark? This doesn't look safe." He gave me a reassuring smile, though the tension in his eyes was undeniable. "Trust me, we don't have a choice. We need to make it back before nightfall." Reluctantly, I followed him down the treacherous path, the snow crunching beneath our boots as we navigated the precarious descent. The wind howled around us, the snow whipping against our faces, making it nearly impossible to see. Every step felt like a battle against the elements, our progress slow and exhausting. Without warning, the ground beneath us gave way, the snow collapsing into a hidden crevasse that snaked down the mountainside. Panic surged through me as we plummeted into the darkness, the world above disappearing in a blur of white. The impact was jarring, the force of the fall leaving me disoriented and struggling to regain my bearings. When I finally came to, the world was silent, the storm having subsided into a hushed stillness. I looked around, my vision blurry, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The crevasse had deposited us in a small, icy cavern, the walls glistening with layers of frost that sparkled like a million tiny stars. Mark was beside me, his breath shallow, his body battered from the fall. "We need to find a way out," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can't stay here." I nodded, my mind racing as I tried to assess our situation. The cavern was small, the air thick with the scent of cold and the metallic tang of ice. We had little in the way of supplies, and the biting cold was taking its toll, numbing our fingers and toes, making every movement a painful effort. As we began to search for an exit, a feeling of unease settled over me, a sense that we were not alone. The shadows seemed to dance and shift in the dim light, the silence punctuated only by the distant drip of melting snow. Mark led the way, his determination pushing us forward, but the oppressive atmosphere weighed heavily on us, the cavern feeling more like a tomb than a refuge. Hours passed, each one blending into the next, our hope dwindling with each passing moment. We found no signs of a way out, the walls seemingly endless and unyielding. Exhaustion and despair began to take hold, our bodies and minds pushed to their limits by the relentless cold and the oppressive silence. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a faint glimmer of light caught my eye, a narrow passageway that led deeper into the mountainside. "Mark, look," I called out, pointing towards the faint glow. Maybe that's a way out. He squinted, his breath visible in the icy air. It's our only chance. Let's go. We moved towards the passageway, the light growing brighter with each step. As we approached, the air seemed to change, the oppressive weight lifting slightly, replaced by a sense of anticipation and fear. The passageway opened into a narrow tunnel, the walls slick with ice, the path winding upwards towards an unknown destination. As we ascended, the tunnel grew narrower, the light dimming once more as we ventured deeper into the mountain. The silence was deafening, the only sound our labored breaths and the crunch of snow beneath our boots. But as we neared the end of the tunnel, the oppressive feeling returned, the sense that something was watching us, waiting for us. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber, the ceiling lost in darkness, the floor covered in thick, untouched snow. The sight was both awe-inspiring and terrifying, the cavernous space echoing with an eerie silence that pressed down on us like a physical force. In the center of the chamber stood a figure, its form indistinct, shrouded in shadow and frost. Mark and I froze, our eyes locked on the mysterious presence before us. "Who are you?" Mark demanded, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped us both. The figure remained silent, its presence oppressive and otherworldly. The air grew colder still, the snow swirling around us in unnatural patterns, the shadows dancing with a life of their own. A whisper echoed through the chamber, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Leave this place." The voice intoned, the words sending shivers down my spine. "This mountain is not for the living." "We didn't mean any harm," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "We just want to go home." The figure began to move, its form becoming more defined, revealing the face of a man long gone, his eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "You cannot escape," he whispered, his voice tinged with sadness and menace. "The mountain claims all who enter, trapping them in its icy embrace." Panic surged through me as Mark and I turned to flee, the realization dawning that we were trapped, caught in the clutches of something ancient and malevolent. The chamber seemed to close in on us, the snow piling up around our feet, the walls pressing closer with every passing moment. "We have to fight it," Mark shouted, his determination pushing us to stand our ground. "We can't let this thing take us." But the figure was relentless, his presence overwhelming, the very air thick with its power. The whispers grew louder, filling the chamber with a cacophony of sorrow and rage, the spirits of the mountain clamoring for our souls. The snow swirled around us, a blinding tempest that threatened to engulf us entirely, the shadows reaching out with icy tendrils that clawed at our skin. In a desperate attempt to break free, I reached out towards the figure, my fingers brushing against the frozen form. A surge of energy pulsed through me, the cold searing my skin, leaving me numb and disoriented. Mark and I stumbled back, our breaths shallow as the reality of our predicament set in. The figure loomed over us, its eyes piercing through the darkness, the weight of its sorrow pressing down on us. "You belong to the mountain now," it declared, the finality in its voice sealing our fate. As the chamber closed in, the snow piling higher, Mark and I succumbed to the icy grip of the mountain, our screams swallowed by the endless white. The avalanche of 2006 became a chilling reminder of the unforgiving power of nature and the mysteries that lie hidden within the majestic peaks of Aspen. Years later, the disappearance of Mark Zapp remains a haunting mystery. The avalanche, a tragic event that claimed the lives of many adventurers seeking the thrill of the mountains. But those who dare to venture into the heart of Aspen whisper tales of restless spirits and malevolent forces, forever guarding the secrets of the avalanche of 2006. And sometimes, when the snow begins to fall just right, I can almost hear Mark's laughter echoing through the mountains, a ghostly reminder of the friends we've lost and the eternal allure of the wild, untamed wilderness. Story number 5. The Avalanche of 1999. The snow-covered peaks of the Alps stood silent and imposing against the crisp blue sky, their majestic forms cloaked in white as far as the eye could see. I'm Daniel Harris, an avid skier and a freelance photographer, always chasing the perfect shot in the untouched wilderness. In the winter of 1999, I joined a group of friends for what was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, a week-long skiing adventure at the renowned Glacier Ridge Resort. Our group consisted of 6: myself, Laura, Mark, Jessica, Tom, and Sarah. We were a mix of seasoned skiers and enthusiastic beginners, united by our love for the mountains and the thrill of the slopes. Glacier Ridge was the perfect destination. Sprawling runs, cozy lodges, and the promise of pristine powder that attracted skiers from around the world. The first few days were everything we had hoped for. We carved our way down the slopes, the wind whipping through our hair, the sun glinting off the freshly fallen snow. Nights were spent gathered around the fireplace in the lodge, sharing stories and laughter. The warmth of friendship keeping the winter chill at bay. Felt like paradise, a temporary escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. But as the days progressed, the weather began to shift. What started as light snowfall turned into heavy, relentless storms, the wind howling through the valleys with an intensity that was both awe-inspiring and foreboding. On the 4th day, the forecast warned of an impending avalanche. But the allure of untouched trails and the stubborn optimism of our group kept us pushing forward. One Saturday morning, we decided to tackle the notorious Eagle's Crest, a challenging run known for its steep gradients and deep powder. The trail was less traveled, a hidden gem that promised solitude and the chance to test our skills against the unforgiving terrain. As we ascended, the sky darkened, clouds gathering ominously above us. Mark, ever the thrill-seeker, urged us to proceed, dismissing the warnings as exaggerated tales spun by locals. Halfway up the slope, the air grew colder, the wind biting at our faces with a ferocity that seemed almost personal. Laura, usually the voice of reason, expressed concern. Maybe we should turn back, she suggested, her breath visible in the frigid air. But Tom, equally stubborn, shook his head. We came here for this. Let's not bail now. We continued, the atmosphere tense, each step forward feeling heavier than the last. The snow beneath our skis was deep and soft, muffling our movements as we navigated the narrow path. Suddenly, without warning, the ground beneath us began to tremble, the snow shifting violently as the mountain unleashed its wrath. An avalanche, massive and unstoppable, rushed down the slope, engulfing everything in its path. Panic erupted as we scattered, trying to outrun the cascading snow and ice. The roar was deafening, the force of the avalanche unrelenting. I lost sight of Sarah in the chaos, her screams swallowed by the tumultuous roar of the storm. Mark and Jessica were caught in the onslaught, their figures disappearing beneath the white fury. Tom and Laura were separated from me, their shouts echoing through the storm as they struggled to find safety. When the avalanche finally subsided, an eerie silence fell over the mountains. The devastation left in its wake a stark contrast to the vibrant life we had known just moments before. Exhausted and disoriented, Tom and I regrouped, our breaths ragged as we surveyed the destruction around us. The trail was buried under meters of snow, the landscape transformed into a lifeless expanse of white. Sarah, Tom whispered, his voice choked with fear. Where is she? I shook my head, the reality of our situation sinking in. We were trapped, miles away from any help, surrounded by the unforgiving wilderness. The cold was biting, our bodies numb from the prolonged exposure, and our supplies were dwindling rapidly. The initial shock gave way to a desperate struggle for survival, the bonds of friendship tested by the merciless environment. Days turned into nights, and the hope of rescue faded as we grappled with the harsh reality of our predicament. Food was scarce, and the cold was relentless, gnawing at our will to survive. Laura became increasingly agitated, her anxiety morphing into paranoia. I keep hearing whispers, she confessed one night, her eyes wide with fear. It's like something is watching us. Mark, who had miraculously survived the initial avalanche, dismissed her fears as stress-induced hallucinations. We're just tired and hungry, he said, though his voice wavered. There's nothing out there. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent with each passing day. At night, we could hear footsteps crunching in the snow, voices murmuring unintelligibly, and the faint sound of laughter echoing through the cold air. It felt as though we were not alone, our presence in the mountains being watched by unseen eyes. One evening, as we huddled together for warmth, the temperature plummeted further, the storm returning with renewed fury. The whispers became cries, the footsteps transforming into heavy thuds that seemed to approach our makeshift shelter. Panic surged through us as the oppressive atmosphere tightened around us, the sense of being hunted overwhelming our already fragile sanity. In a moment of sheer terror, Sarah reappeared, her eyes hollow and her demeanor broken. "We need to leave," she insisted, her voice devoid of emotion. "Something is here with us." Before we could react, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, its form indistinct yet undeniably present. The air grew thick with a malevolent energy, the very essence of fear manifesting before us. The figure moved with unnatural speed, its presence suffocating, as if the mountains themselves had come to claim us. "Why are you here?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely audible over the storm's rage. The figure remained silent, its gaze piercing through the darkness, the whispers coalescing into a single, haunting question. "Why have you disturbed our peace?" The realization hit me like a wave. The mountains were not just a natural force, but something far more ancient and vengeful, awakened by our intrusion. The line between the physical and the supernatural blurred, the boundaries of reality bending under the weight of our fear and desperation. Desperately, we tried to flee, the figure pursuing us relentlessly, its presence a constant reminder of our impending doom. The terrain became a twisted nightmare, the once familiar slopes now transformed into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. Each step forward felt like a step deeper into madness, the mountain's curse tightening its grip around our souls. In the final moments, as exhaustion and fear consumed us, only Tom and I remained. The others had been lost to the mountain's wrath, their spirits forever trapped in the icy embrace of the Alps. We found ourselves back at the edge of the trail, the storm beginning to abate, the shadows receding as if retreating from our futile resistance. But the damage was done. The whispers lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that had claimed our friends and now threatened to consume us. We knew that our time was running out, the mountain's curse inching ever closer to claiming our lives as well. On the brink of collapse, we summoned every ounce of strength left within us, pushing forward with the desperate hope of finding salvation. The first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, casting a pale light over the desolate landscape. Exhausted and broken, we stumbled towards the base of the mountain, the whispers fading into a mournful silence. When rescue teams finally found us weeks later, we were a shadow of our former selves, our bodies and minds scarred by the ordeal. The truth of the avalanche of 1999 remained shrouded in mystery, our accounts dismissed as the ravings of traumatized survivors. But deep down, we knew the reality of what had transpired. Something ancient and malevolent had claimed us, a curse born from the unforgiving heart of the Alps. The memories of those lost souls and the haunting whispers continue to echo in my mind, a constant reminder of the thin veil that separates us from the darkness that lurks in the wilderness. The Dyatlov Pass incident may have been a tale of tragedy and survival, but our story is one of supernatural horror, a testament to the enduring power of fear and the mysteries that lie hidden in the most remote corners of our world. As I sit by the fireplace, staring into the flickering flames, I can still hear the whispers, a chilling reminder that some curses never fade, and some mountains hold secrets that are better left undisturbed. Story number 6. The Dyatlov Pass incident. The first snow of the season had already begun to cloak the Ural Mountains in a serene, white blanket, transforming the rugged landscape into something almost otherworldly. I'm Igor Petrov, a seasoned mountaineer with a deep love for the untouched wilderness. In 1959, my friends and I embarked on what was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, a challenging ski trek across the formidable Dyatlov Pass. Little did we know, the pass held secrets darker than the deepest shadows of the night. Our group consisted of 9 men, each bringing unique skills and an unyielding spirit to the expedition. Among us were Yuri, our leader, whose experience and calm demeanor kept us grounded; Nikolai, the geologist, always eager to explore the unseen layers of the earth; and Pavel, the youngest, whose enthusiasm was infectious. We had meticulously planned our route, ensuring we were well prepared for the harsh conditions that awaited us. The journey began smoothly, the crisp mountain air invigorating our spirits as we navigated the narrow trails flanked by towering pines and sheer cliffs. Days passed with a rhythm of skiing by day and huddling around the fire by night, sharing stories and dreams under the vast expanse of the starlit sky. The camaraderie was strong, our bond forged through shared challenges and mutual respect. But as we delved deeper into the pass, the weather began to shift. What started as light snow escalated into a fierce blizzard, the wind howling through the valleys like the cries of lost souls. Visibility plummeted, and the once familiar landscape became a maze of white oblivion. We found ourselves struggling to maintain our course, the storm's fury testing our endurance and resolve. One particularly harrowing night, as the storm raged outside, we decided to set up camp early, seeking shelter in a small, sheltered nook we had scouted earlier. The wind battered our tent relentlessly, the fabric straining under the pressure of the storm's wrath. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, each man acutely aware of the life-and-death struggle unfolding outside. As the hours dragged on, an unsettling silence enveloped the tent, broken only by the relentless howl of the wind and the occasional creak of the fabric under the strain. Yuri, sensing our collective anxiety, attempted to calm our nerves. "We need to stay strong," he urged, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. "We've faced worse before, but that night, something felt different. A palpable sense of dread settled over us, as if the mountains themselves were watching, waiting." Pavel, restless and jittery, paced the tent, his eyes darting nervously to every sound and shadow. Nikolai tried to distract him with tales of geological formations, but the unease remained, an invisible weight pressing down on our spirits. In the early hours of the morning, the storm reached its zenith. The wind's fury intensified, howling like a living beast, and the temperature plummeted to life-threatening lows. It was then that we heard it, a faint, eerie whisper carried by the wind, indistinct yet undeniably present. At first, we dismissed it as the storm playing tricks on our frayed nerves. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent. "Leave, now," the voices seemed to chant, a haunting plea that sent chills down our spines. Yuri, ever the rational leader, insisted it was just the wind again, but the fear in our eyes told a different story. Sleep became impossible, our minds racing with fear and paranoia. The whispers turned into cries, echoing through the tent, and the atmosphere became suffocating, as if the very air was thick with malevolent intent. By midday, the storm showed no signs of relenting. Our supplies were dwindling, and the cold was taking its toll. Desperation set in as we realized we might not make it out alive. Yuri made the difficult decision to abandon our planned route and seek refuge in a nearby cabin he had spotted earlier, a decrepit structure that seemed barely weathered by time. The trek to the cabin was a nightmare of whiteout conditions and biting cold, our progress slow and arduous. Exhaustion weighed heavily on us, each step a battle against the elements. When we finally reached the cabin, it stood as a lone sentinel amidst the storm, its windows dark and foreboding. Inside, the cabin was empty, its interior cloaked in darkness and decay. We lit a fire in the old hearth, the flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. As we huddled together for warmth, the whispers returned, louder and more urgent than before. Stay, stay away. The voices seemed to warn, their tone no longer pleading but threatening. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the room, a dark, indistinct form that seemed to materialize from the very walls. Panic erupted among us as the realization dawned. Something malevolent inhabited this place, feeding off our fear and desperation. Yuri tried to maintain his composure, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. "We need to leave now," he urged, grabbing our gear and leading us toward the door. But as we reached for the handle, the shadowy figure lunged at us, his presence overwhelming and suffocating. Chaos ensued as we scrambled to escape, the shadow's form shifting and contorting in unnatural ways. The cabin seemed to warp around us, the walls closing in, trapping us in a nightmare of our own making. One by one, members of our group succumbed to the terror, their screams echoing through the haunted cabin before they were silenced by the darkness. Luke, the geologist, was the first to fall, his body found the next morning, his face contorted in a silent scream of agony. The remaining men were left in a state of sheer terror, their sanity fraying as the malevolent force pressed in on us from all sides. As dusk approached, the storm finally began to abate, the whispers fading into a chilling silence. Yuri, now a shell of his former self, gathered what little strength he had left and made the fateful decision to stay behind, sacrificing himself in a desperate attempt to save the rest of us. "I'll hold them off," he declared, his voice barely audible. "Go, and don't look back." With heavy hearts and shattered spirits, the remaining members of our group fled the cabin, the mountains around us seemingly indifferent to our plight. We wandered through the blinding snow, our minds haunted by the horrors we had witnessed, the whispers of the mountains echoing in our ears. When rescue teams finally found us weeks later, we were a broken and battered group, our bodies and minds scarred by the ordeal. The cabin had been found empty, the only sign of the tragedy the mutilated bodies and the eerie remnants of the whispers that still lingered in the air. The Dyatlov Pass incident became a legend, a tale of survival and the unforgiving wrath of nature. But for me, it was a harrowing reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the malevolent forces that lurk in the shadows of the wilderness, waiting for unsuspecting souls to cross their path. Even now, decades later, the memory of that night on the slopes of Mont Blanc remains vivid, a ghostly echo that haunts my dreams and a chilling reminder of the darkness that resides in the heart of the mountains. The Dyatlov Pass holds its secrets tightly, but the whispers of that fateful night continue to echo through the ages, a testament to the enduring power of fear and the unending mysteries of the wild. Story number 7. The ski trip on Mont Blanc. The first snowfall of the season had transformed Mont Blanc into a breathtaking expanse of white, its majestic peaks piercing the sky like silent sentinels. I'm Henri Dupont, a seasoned mountaineer and the unofficial leader of our small group of friends who shared a passion for skiing and the untamed beauty of the French Alps. It was 1950, a time when the world was still healing from the ravages of war, and the mountains offered a sanctuary of peace and adventure. Our group consisted of 5: myself, Jacques, Marie, Luc, and Isabelle. We had planned this trip meticulously, eager to carve fresh tracks down the untouched slopes and revel in the solitude that only such remote wilderness could provide. The excitement was palpable as we loaded our equipment into the sturdy sleds, the crisp morning air filled with laughter and the promise of unforgettable memories. The ascent was challenging but exhilarating. The trail was pristine, bordered by towering pines that whispered secrets to the wind. As we reached a high plateau, the world below seemed to fade away, replaced by an endless panorama of snow-covered peaks and valleys. We set up camp for the night, the flickering flames of our fire casting long shadows on the snow. The next day, the weather held steady, the sun shining brightly as we embarked on our descent. The snow was perfect, soft and powdery, ideal for the deep, thrilling runs we had envisioned. We laughed and raced each other down the slopes, the cold air invigorating our spirits. Felt like paradise, a fleeting moment of pure joy amidst the harshness of winter. But as afternoon turned to evening, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. The sky, once a clear blue, now churned with ominous shades of gray. A chill wind swept through the mountains, carrying with it the first signs of an impending storm. We decided to cut our runs short and head back to camp, hoping to beat the weather before it worsened. As we trudged through the increasingly heavy snowfall, visibility diminished, the world around us swallowed by the relentless whiteout. The wind howled like a living creature, whipping the snow into blinding curtains that made navigation nearly impossible. Panic set in as we realized we were lost, our map rendered useless by the treacherous conditions. "We need to find shelter," Jacques called out, his voice strained against the roar of the storm. "We can't keep moving like this." We stumbled through the blinding snow, each step a battle against the biting cold and the overwhelming exhaustion that threatened to consume us. Hours passed, the storm showing no signs of abating, its fury unabated. Our sleds were buried in the snow, our provisions running dangerously low. Desperation gnawed at our minds, the fear of the unknown pressing in from all sides. Luke was the first to succumb to the relentless cold. His body found the next morning, frozen and lifeless. The loss hit us hard, the reality of our situation sinking in with brutal clarity. The survival instinct took over, overshadowing any remnants of our camaraderie. Hunger and fear twisted our thoughts, pushing us towards a darkness we had never imagined. Marie, once the heart of our group, began to lose her grip on sanity, her cries echoing through the storm as she wandered aimlessly, searching for something, anything, to sustain her. Isabel and I stayed close, the bond between us strengthened by the shared terror. But the cold was merciless, and the days blurred into a nightmare of survival. One bitter night, with the storm raging around us, Isabel made a harrowing decision. The desperation in her eyes mirrored the hopelessness that had taken root within me. "We have no choice," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "We can't die here." Tears streamed down my face as we faced the unthinkable. The act of cannibalism weighed heavily on my soul, a stain that would forever mark the depths of human desperation. We divided the remains, each piece a grim reminder of what we had become. The nights were the worst, the guilt gnawing at my conscience, the screams of our lost friends haunting my every thought. Weeks passed, the storm eventually subsiding, leaving behind a desolate and transformed landscape. Our bodies, weakened by hunger and the toll of survival, could barely support the weight of our sorrow. The search parties, alerted by our disappearance, scoured the mountains, their efforts hampered by the harsh terrain and relentless weather. One morning, the rescuers found us, a grim sight amidst the vast expanse of snow. Isabel and I were barely recognizable, our features contorted by starvation and the unforgiving cold. The others had been found, victims of our desperate actions, their bodies bearing the gruesome marks of cannibalism. The rescue was swift, the weight of our actions sinking in as we were hauled to safety, our souls irreparably shattered. In the hospital, I spent countless hours grappling with the horror of what we had done, the loss of our friends, and the torment of our survival. The memories of those dark days on Mont Blanc would forever haunt me, the screams of our lost companions echoing in the silent corridors of my mind. Years later, the scars remained, both physical and emotional, a testament to the fragility of the human spirit when pushed to its limits. The mountains, once a symbol of beauty and adventure, became a haunting reminder of our darkest moments, a place where hope and despair intertwined in a deadly dance. I often found myself drawn back to the images of Mont Blanc, the towering peaks now a backdrop to the ghostly memories that refused to fade. The whispers of the wind through the pines seemed to carry the voices of those we had lost, their presence a constant reminder of the cost of our survival. In the quiet moments, I would sit by the window, watching the snowfall and remembering the friends who had fallen beside me. The weight of our actions pressed heavily on my heart. The guilt a relentless companion that no amount of time could erase. The mountains had claimed us, binding our souls to their eternal winter, a punishment for the darkness that had consumed us. But amidst the sorrow and the memories, there was a glimmer of understanding, a recognition of the lengths we had gone to survive, the desperation that had driven us to the edge of humanity. The lesson was etched deeply into my being, a reminder of the thin line between hope and despair, and the darkness that can emerge when that line is crossed. The ski trip on Mont Blanc was more than just a journey into the mountains. It was a descent into the human psyche, a confrontation with the shadows that lie within us all. And as I reflect on those harrowing days, I am reminded of the resilience and the fragility of the human spirit, forever bound to the haunting beauty of Mont Blanc.